Jacob here with Sarracenia Northwest. In this video, I'll share with you what we've learned over the past 30 years of growing Darlingtonia californica and why it can be such a finicky plant to grow. The common belief is that Darlingtonia needs cool roots. If the soil temperature gets too warm, the plant will die. We used to believe that when we first started out, but now we disagree. This video is divided into 4 sections. I'll start with a brief overview of 3 different populations of Darlingtonia we've examined: coastal populations, mountain populations, and plants in cultivation. Then I'll discuss 3 factors we explored, comparing and contrasting them across each population, along with the conclusions we've drawn for each factor. Since I'm summarizing 30 years of experience in a single video, I'll share our updated recommendations in a separate video. So this video focuses on the thought process behind our conclusions. Darlingtonia's natural range extends from Northern California to Oregon, but it occurs in 2 distinct habitats: coastal and mountain. The first population we studied was the coastal plants along the Oregon coast. These coastal populations grow in large open sphagnum bogs where the soil is acidic, water flows constantly, and the plants get lots of sunlight throughout the day. The water is also very pure and low in minerals. A popular spot to see Darlingtonia is at the Darlingtonia Wayside in Florence, Oregon. Because of its accessibility, many people assume this is a typical habitat for Darlingtonia. However, this location isn't representative of the populations we've studied. The habitat here is also a sphagnum bog, but trees are encroaching and the plants are gradually becoming more shaded. If this habitat hadn't been maintained as a state park, it would have disappeared decades ago. One nearby site disappeared because it wasn't as well maintained as the Darlingtonia Wayside. Larger open habitats are far more common among coastal populations. These are the populations we studied to learn how to cultivate them. The climate on the Oregon coast is also very mild. During the summer, there can be a lot of morning fog. Daytime temperatures might be in the upper 70s, rarely going over 80 degrees. Now, if you've ever visited San Francisco during the summer, you'll get a good idea of what the Oregon coast is like. Compared to coastal populations, mountain populations grow in a very different type of soil and climate. These are the second populations we studied. They mostly occur in the Siskiyou Mountains of southern Oregon and northern California, but can also be found in pockets within the Cascade Mountains. In the Siskiyou Mountains, Darlingtonia grow in large open wetlands. However, they grow in serpentine soil, which is rich in minerals, making it alkaline rather than acidic. The Siskiyou Mountains are also located further inland, so the climate is much drier and warmer compared to the Oregon coast. Summer temperatures frequently range in the 80s and 90s, occasionally going over 100 degrees. The third population we examined consists of plants grown in cultivation, mainly at our nursery in Eagle Creek, Oregon. Our climate is similar to that of the Siskiyous, but unlike wild populations, our plants are grown in pots with more exposure to the weather. Over the years, we've experimented with various methods to simulate conditions in the wild, such as drip systems and different growing media. We've also sold thousands of Darlingtonia to growers across the United States. Growers grew them in a variety of climates, temperatures, and growing methods. They either followed our care instructions or used someone else's. From their feedback, we saw their successes and struggles, what worked and what didn't. Using these 3 populations, coastal, mountain, and cultivated, we were able to compare and contrast 3 key factors believed to be essential for successfully growing Darlingtonia. When we examined the climate at the Oregon coast, the Siskiyou Mountains, and our nursery, we noticed a common factor across all 3: cool nights. When we surveyed growers in other parts of the United States, those who successfully grew Darlingtonia consistently came from regions where cool summer nights are the norm. If you're familiar with highland nepenthes, you'll understand the importance of cool nights. Generally, species from high mountain areas experience cool nights. In summer, daytime temperatures can reach the mid-80s or higher, but nighttime temperatures often fall into the 50s. Sometimes they go even lower depending on the location. This nighttime temperature drop is essential for many mountain plants. And I consider Darlingtonia a highland or mountain plant. Most of its populations are found in the Siskiyou Mountains of southern Oregon and northern California. The accessible populations are usually at about 1,500 feet elevation, while many remote populations occur at 3,000 feet or higher. Now, the average nighttime temperature at these elevations during July and August hovers in the low 50s. Even along the Oregon coast at sea level, nights are also in the low 50s, rarely going above 60 degrees. Therefore, I consider all Darlingtonia to be mountain plants, even those found along the Oregon coast. Caring for Darlingtonia as you would a mountain plant is crucial because cool nights play a big role in keeping the plant healthy. Now, mountain plants differ from lowland plants in how they function in cold temperatures. Without getting too technical, mountain plants are metabolically active at cold temperatures, while lowland plants are not. This is why lowland plants need warm temperatures to stay metabolically active. Their metabolism doesn't work well at cold temperatures. Conversely, mountain plants have adapted to be metabolically active in cooler conditions. But this also means that for mountain plants to fully rest at night, they require a much larger drop in nighttime temperature. This is necessary to slow down their metabolism enough to conserve energy. They also need cool nights to keep a healthy immune system. If nights are consistently warm, mountain plants will remain metabolically active and use up their energy stores. Now, because they can't undergo photosynthesis at night to replenish their energy stores, they risk running into an energy deficit. If that happens, they will weaken and die from disease or exhaustion. Think of it like not getting enough sleep night after night because nights are too warm. Now, because Darlingtonia is a mountain plant, it needs very cold nights to survive. This is why growers in the South, East Coast, and Upper Midwest have trouble keeping Darlingtonia alive for more than a growing season or two. Summer nights in those areas are much hotter than temperatures Darlingtonia has adapted to in the wild. So those who successfully grow Darlingtonia usually live in climates where summer nights regularly drop into the 50s. At our nursery in Oregon, summer temperatures are often in the low to mid 50s at night. Even during the hottest parts of summer, when daytime temperatures rise above 100 degrees, our nighttime lows rarely go above 60. Now, based on observations in the wild and feedback from other growers across the country, cool nights are a key factor in growing Darlingtonia. So very simply, Darlingtonia is a mountain plant. It needs cool nights to meet its metabolic needs. And that brings us to the next topic, soil temperature. If cool nights are essential for the metabolic needs of Darlingtonia, do these plants also require cool daytime temperatures, or more specifically, cool soil temperatures throughout the day? Are the roots sensitive to daytime heat? Now, many growers in regions with cool nights still struggle growing Darlingtonia, and we're no exception. We've had our struggles, and I'll share them in a bit. But many growers sometimes complain that their plants will die for almost no apparent reason. The common belief is that Darlingtonia needs cool roots. If the soil gets too hot, the plant will die. So growers come up with different methods to keep the roots cool. Some suggest using styrofoam containers and putting ice cubes over the soil. In the past, we recommended a drip system for aeration and evaporative cooling. Now, despite our past success in managing soil temperature, I've never been satisfied with the idea that Darlingtonia will die if the soil gets too warm. But I understand why that belief exists. If you measure soil temperature in Darlingtonia's native habitat, you'll find temperatures in the 50s and 60s, depending on location and time of year. So the assumption is that the roots need to stay constantly cool. If they overheat, they'll die. However, in cultivation, the effect of soil heat on Darlingtonia is inconsistent. And I'm specifically talking about growers who live in areas with cool nights like the Pacific Northwest. In regions with warm nights, Darlingtonia often dies, and this is based on reports from growers east of the Mississippi. So I'm not talking about those plants grown in those climates, but rather to Darlingtonia growing in the Pacific Northwest and other areas with naturally cool nights. If high soil temperature were the only reason for plants dying, we should be able to identify a specific temperature that causes die-off and see consistent results. Instead, what we've observed is that soil heat's effect on Darlingtonia varies. Some plants die despite having cool nights, while others in identical conditions thrive. This is why Darlingtonia seems finicky and temperamental. In 2009, we visited the Darlingtonia sites in southern Oregon during a heat wave. The temperature reached 108 degrees for a couple of days. We recorded humidity, soil pH, and soil temperature. In some locations, soil temperatures were in the 80s. We documented all this in our video, Serpent in the Siskiyous. Now, I'll admit the video is very dated and was filmed on videotape, but the information still matters today. You can find the link in the description below. We've visited those mountain populations numerous times since then, and those colonies are still growing very well to this day. So based on what we observed in the Siskiyous, we concluded that Darlingtonia can withstand soil temperatures in the 80s. But how much higher can they really tolerate? If you've been following us over the years, you probably know that we like to grow plants in extreme conditions to see what they can handle and what they can't. We often tell customers, we kill plants so you don't have to. Darlingtonia is no exception. We grew plants in different kinds of pots, growing media, and temperature conditions. After 30 years of experimentation and observations in the wild, we finally found a method that gave the most consistent results. Our current setup is as you see here. At the time of filming, it's early summer, and these mother plants are in their 4th growing season in this setup. They produce many offshoots, and what we harvest in spring is what we sell each year. Since being in this setup, these plants endured numerous heat waves with temperatures in the 90s, sometimes going over 100 degrees. They're outside with no special treatment, no styrofoam containers, and no shade. During one of these heat waves, the temperature reached 96 degrees. We recorded soil temperatures in the 80s. This is consistent with what we've observed in southern Oregon, where plants were growing in the open, unprotected from the summer heat. We also experimented with one plant by giving it maximum sunlight and heat. Last summer, when I recorded this clip, the plant had been in this spot for 3 growing seasons. When the thermometer read 104 degrees in the shade, we measured the soil temperature between 105 and 107 with the plant in full sun. Here's the plant now in its 4th growing season. It's already outgrown this pot and will be divided soon. Now, a single potted plant doesn't hold much statistical weight, but because it survived such extreme temperatures, it shows why we challenge the idea that Darlingtonia will die when its roots get hot. Now, if high soil temperatures were the only reason for a plant dying, we should be able to identify a lethal temperature range and observe consistent results in both cultivation and the wild. However, the results are inconsistent. Why do some plants die for no apparent reason despite having cool nights, while others thrive in the same growing conditions? There has to be a missing link to explain why one plant dies and another survives. In 2010, we experienced a situation in which over 90% of our mother plants died. Let me repeat that. We experienced a situation starting in 2010 in which over 90% of our mother plants died. Now, this happened over the course of several growing seasons. 90% of our mother plants just died. Up until then, we grew a thriving colony for 50 15 years. It wasn't until 2010 that we saw the plants wilting and dying. Now, the die-off wasn't consistent. It started gradually, but with each growing season, more and more plants died at a rate we hadn't seen in the previous 15 years. Now, given the pattern of die-off, we suspected it was caused by a disease. In 2015, we sent samples of our plants to the horticultural department at Oregon State University. They diagnosed our plants infected with cylindrocarpon, a fungal soil pathogen that causes root rot. Another soil pathogen, Pythium, was also present, but the plants were primarily infected with cylindrocarpon. If you want to read the report, check the description below. Now, when Darlingtonia is affected with root rot, the first symptom you'll see is wilting. Pitchers will simply wilt and fall over. That's because as roots and plant tissues die, the plant can't draw enough water to sustain the pitchers. Eventually, the entire plant dies. Pythium and cylindrocarpon aren't the only fungal pathogens that can affect Darlingtonia. These were just the two identified by the lab in the samples we sent in. Other fungal pathogens can also cause root rot. Now, the interesting thing about these pathogens is that they thrive in hot weather, especially Pythium. When temperatures go above 85 degrees, they grow like crazy. So, hot weather increases the chance of fungal root rot. This is why some Darlingtonia die during a heat wave. If a plant is infected with a fungal pathogen, it will die during hot weather. So, based on the lab report and the pattern of die-off in our colony, we concluded that a soil pathogen was the missing link we were looking for, and it made perfect sense. It's a similar situation with growing tomatoes. Over time, soil pathogens can accumulate if you don't change the soil, and your tomato plants will die off, even if you had a successful crop previously. Now, I want to emphasize that Darlingtonia will only die if it's infected with a soil pathogen. As long as Darlingtonia has cool nights to meet its metabolic needs, it can withstand high soil temperatures. We have not observed any consistent evidence that high soil temperature alone kills these plants. Instead, it's soil pathogens that thrive in hot weather that kill them. Plants will only die if soil pathogens are present. This is why some Darlingtonia can survive the summer heat, while others cannot. To successfully grow these plants, managing soil pathogens is crucial. So what are some of the ways to prevent fungal root rot? One approach is to keep the roots cool. Lower temperatures can slow the growth of soil pathogens. However, keeping the roots cool only masks the root cause. And yes, pun intended. The true cause of fungal root rot is fungus. So it's less about soil heat and more about soil health. Therefore, along with cool nights, managing soil pathogens is essential for the plant's survival. And that brings us to the next topic, soil or growing medium. Carnivorous plants of all types require specialized media when grown in cultivation. So we asked, what are the ways soil pathogens are mitigated in the wild, and how might we adapt those methods in cultivation? But first, the fungal load in the wild is much lower compared to urban areas and regions with a lot of agriculture. But since Darlingtonia is highly susceptible to root rot in cultivation, we wondered if there's more happening in wild populations beyond just a low fungal load. We looked carefully at how Darlingtonia grew in sphagnum bogs along the Oregon coast. In almost all sites we visited, Darlingtonia was growing directly in sphagnum moss. Very few plants grew in peat moss. That was our biggest clue. Sphagnum moss produces compounds that inhibit fungal growth. It also retains water while aerating the roots. The only reason we didn't use live sphagnum moss early on is that it's difficult to cultivate in very large amounts. It just wasn't an efficient use of our nursery space. But given what we were up against, we realized the benefits would outweigh the costs. So we planted all our mother plants directly into live sphagnum moss. This was about 4 years ago. During the first 2 seasons, we saw some residual root rot as the moss got established. But by the 3rd season, once the moss was fully grown, we didn't see any. For plants that showed early signs of root rot during the first 2 years, we removed them and planted them in a granular mix. The granular mix we used was based on experiments we did in the early 2000s. The mix simulated the serpentine soil found in the siskiyous. Serpentine is a type of rock composed of various metals, and it's easy to identify. It's shiny, green, and somewhat brittle, so it breaks down easily. Since we can't just go into the siskiyous and dig up serpentine soil, we recreated it using vermiculite and pumice. Vermiculite has a similar mineral content to serpentine, but it's readily available for gardening purposes. Pumice improves drainage. Our Darlingtonia thrived in this mix, and we got lots of divisions from our mother plants. The downside? It was too heavy to ship, so we went back to a peat-based mix. Looking back on those experiments, a granular mix proved to be an effective medium for suppressing soil fungus. Very simply, it lacked organic matter for pathogenic fungi to feed on. So we decided to salvage the affected plants by potting them in a granular mix. But we updated the mix to include vermiculite, perlite, and turfus. With this mix, nearly all of them recovered, even during the summer heat wave. So the mix did a decent job of stopping the root rot. Now, I know you're curious about our proportions and why we use perlite and turfus instead of pumice. I'll share that in another video where I'll present our new recommendations for growing Darlingtonia. For now, the message I want to convey is this: having the right growing media is crucial for managing fungal pathogens. Based on our experiments and a review of studies on soil pathogens, we are very confident in recommending either live sphagnum moss or a granular mix for Darlingtonia. It also didn't matter whether you have a coastal or a mountain form of Darlingtonia. In our experiments, we didn't observe any difference in growth when using either medium. Both forms of Darlingtonia grew equally well in sphagnum moss and the granular mix. We also saw no difference in heat tolerance. We once thought the mountain form was more heat tolerant than the coastal form, but that was probably because we grew it in a granular mix. After switching to live sphagnum moss and growing both forms in either medium, we found the coastal form tolerates heat just as well as the mountain form. In fact, the overgrown Darlingtonia that experienced soil temperatures over 100 degrees was the coastal form. It was also growing in a granular mix. Now, one ingredient we no longer use with Darlingtonia is peat moss. Peat moss is partially decomposed sphagnum moss, and we use it with a wide variety of carnivorous plants. In hindsight, peat moss gave us inconsistent results. While it has properties that help suppress soil fungi, its effectiveness depends on where the peat was harvested. Peat moss harvested deeper in the ground is less effective at suppressing pathogens than peat closer to the surface. Additionally, some studies show that the suppressive effects last only about 6 to 7 weeks. After that, much of the tannins were washed away or became inactive. When we used a peat-based mix for Darlingtonia, we had to replace the medium at least every 2 years to keep it fresh. After 2 years, the peat would break down and we would start to see die-off. This is also confirmed by other growers in our region. When we reviewed all the different soil mixes we used over the years, we noticed more consistent results with either live sphagnum moss or the granular mix. For this reason, we stopped using peat moss when growing Darlingtonia. Now, you might wonder about using a systemic fungicide since we're dealing with a fungal problem. While it is an option, we don't recommend it as a long-term solution. For the average grower, a systemic fungicide can be helpful in an emergency to salvage a plant. However, we advise against relying on it long-term because repeated or improper use can lead to resistance. There are also serious health concerns to consider. Due to the health risk, we believe the best long-term strategy for managing soil pathogens is to use either live sphagnum moss or a granular mix. And there you go. I just shared with you 30 years of experience growing Darlingtonia. We've shed a lot of sweat and tears trying to crack the code for successful growth. The idea that Darlingtonia needs cool roots isn't quite correct. Keeping the roots cool can help, but it only masks the actual reason for the plant's decline: warm nights and undiagnosed fungal root rot. That's why this plant has often been misunderstood. Successful cultivation ultimately depends on cool nights and the right growing media. Darlingtonia is a mountain plant that requires cool nights to meet its metabolic needs. Using the proper growing medium is also essential to protect the plant from soil pathogens. When these two factors are in place, Darlingtonia is more likely to thrive for many, many years. In a follow-up video, I'll summarize all this information into our new recommendations, which will include the proportions for our granular mix and details about sunlight and water. I'll also share another video showing how to salvage a Darlingtonia affected by root rot. The links to these videos will be posted below when they're ready. To learn more about growing carnivorous plants or to purchase Darlingtonia divisions of our mother plants, visit our website, growcarnivorousplants.com. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in another video.